Welcome to Green and Gold FC.
And a duel, and they're poked home by Tim Cahill. Australia have done it. Could write the Matildas into history. Cue the party. The best team of the A-League era. And it goes. Tyler! It's a save that means the world to Australia.
Welcome to Green and Gold FC, the podcast for the fans, by the fans. We are very lucky today to have David Cvetkovski from Preston Lions FC right after the big game on the weekend to discuss the history of Preston Lions, the prospects of the Australian Championship, and the amazing story that is this club. We're joined today, as always, by Alex and David. How are you going, Alex?
I'm doing very well, Graham. And look, as someone who doesn't have much history of watching NPL Victoria, I've got to say, what a show that Preston and South Melbourne put on over the weekend. That was absolutely phenomenal. And I've got to say, I'm going to be heavily invested in New South Wales and Victorian NPL, given that the Australian Championship is coming along. But David, credit to you and the boys over at Preston for the massive win. And yeah, excited to hear all about the history of this great club.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thanks for having me on. It's an honour, and to all the listeners out there, hopefully you get an insight into this beautiful club called Preston Lions.
So let's start with last night's game. What a brilliant show. Obviously, congratulations, of course. First of all, joining the NPL Victoria this season and the incredible crowd you had. What are your thoughts after the game?
Yeah, you don't have too much time to think. As the president of the club, you kind of quickly start moving on to making sure that you have your post-game review as a club, as a committee, as a board, and then also start planning for next week. So you don't allow yourself too much time. Had a couple of nice hugs with the boys and my family post the game, and I got two daughters, so it was nice to celebrate with them and my wife. And then you get straight back into it, guys. You can't allow yourself too much time. This is, as we called it last Friday night, it was called the Big Show, and it was called the Big Show for a reason, with 9,036 supporters from not only both clubs, but I think football fans are coming out to be a part of the experience and to enjoy the show, whether it be, mothers and their daughters or grandparents or families coming out. We're noticing a real shift in terms of the demographic of people that are wanting. We know at a junior level, a lot of kids are playing football, but hopefully we've been able to tap into something special, and that's provide a product and an experience for people to come down and enjoy our beautiful game.
So Preston Lions hasn't always had crowds this strong in the NPL system in Victoria. In fact, if I understand correctly, it really hit rock bottom about a decade ago. As lower as quite a few divisions down, the club was really, really struggling to survive. Can you tell us about that? How low did it go?
Yeah, we're talking almost 5 divisions down from where we are at the moment. At that time, I think it was State League One. And when I talk about the club, I don't only talk about it from a men's program. I talk about also from a women's program, and both programs have been pivotal to our success. But both the men and the women were State One, potentially on the verge of going down even to State Two at one stage, and it was for no one's fault. It was just the deterioration of the club, and they're just needing people to step up. And thankfully, that period of, the early 2012, 13, 14 period, we had some amazing people who just, like always, as at clubs, decided to put their hands up. There was no one person or one committee responsible for the demise. All committees and all committee people always tried their best. But at that time, we just felt that the club was, I think we were owing the ATO a lot of money. We would have had 30, 35 juniors. So the juniors mechanism was almost non-existent, and the two senior teams, and especially, let's call it the men's flagship team, was struggling in the state leagues. And what then happened was there was just a massive call out by some very good people who put their hand up to go back, and we call it a generational change of a lot of people who just were trusted, who went back and slowly we started all putting our hand up to rebuild this club. It's to everyone's credit. It's no one person, no one president, no one committee member. It's the dedication, as we saw on Friday night, of thousands of people who are all making their little contribution. And as we find ourselves, it was probably a great thing for us as a club to have an aspiration back then, because we were able to believe in something, set out a strategy. We've always had what we call our 5-year strategies, and we're on to our third iteration now, heading into 2030. But we set out strategies. My background, I'm involved in a range of businesses and global businesses, and football clubs are no different. You need a strategy and you need to treat them like a business, because if the bottom line doesn't make sense or is non-existent, the club can't thrive. And one of the key strategic pillars has got to be clearly your financial, your compliance, but also the health and well-being of your people, but also then your programs, which in our case would be juniors, men, and the women's program. So we've slowly put into place the strategy to slowly rebuild this over what is now probably the 12th, 13th year of the rebuild.
So you say 30 juniors. That's just seems
Yeah.
unthinkable with where the club is now. How did it get that low?
This is not uncommon. I take a lot of pleasure of going and speaking to a lot of clubs and trying to help clubs as much as I can and sharing our story. It's just a deterioration. It's ruthless. It's based on volunteers, and sometimes the mix, and the mix at our time at that period of having the right resources, having the right people in place and the right strategy, we just unfortunately wasn't there at the time. And this can very easily happen to any club and does happen to clubs. But how do we ensure the clubs have strategies and are not relying on the shoulders? Unfortunately for football clubs, suburban football clubs, they're relying on the shoulders of a few people. And what we've been able to do is engage our community at all levels, our stakeholders, to rebuild it. But it's 35 kids. I think we're closing in on 500 kids these days. 500 kids. With that comes potentially 1,000 parents. How do we engage with those parents? How do we engage with the children? We're almost at parity in terms of our girls programs. That wasn't a thing, but on the back of the success of girls junior football, the Matildas, we've been able to build a massive force of young girls and women, and by default mothers and families, that are now contributing to our club at an executive level. I just see 50% of this senior executive is female and 70% of our junior executive is female. And with this comes thought leadership and diversity of thought that every club needs, So, yeah.
So you guys had some pretty wacky out of the box strategies for attracting sponsors. I hear you even gave sponsors their own car park. When was that?
Yes, our car. That's very good. We've become very famous for our car parks, but most clubs have car parks. And when you get inundated with fans like we do, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, or 9,000, one of the hottest properties we realized we had was a car park. So what we've done is pretty easy. Gone to Bunnings and bought some rope. We roped off 50 to 60 car parks, and those sponsors that pay premium have access on a Friday night, for example, when it's heaving, to drive their car in and park the car at the front door. Pretty simple concept.
So is that the head of the local Coles or Bunnings or your local sponsors
Yes.
then?
Yeah, well, in our case, we have 140. I think we're almost going to knock 150 sponsors. And these are a range of our local community. We even got families and parents, but also your large corporates. We've got the likes of your Coles and your IGAs, Northern Motor Group. So, your car companies, Visi, some great major sponsors have also come on board. Harvey Norman, I could keep rattling them off, McDonald's. So it's all about having a proposition, whether it be footballing or a commercial proposition, and going to your key stakeholders, council. We got to go to council and government for funding. So if you've got a strategy, if you've got a proposition, it makes it a lot easier when you're presenting yourself as a club to be able to engage with these key stakeholders and convince them of the case. And in our case, it was to build a thriving and successful football environment for the future of the game and for children. Primarily, we love having the kids who hopefully transition then into, senior roles within the club. And it's a healthy place to be.
So when did the sponsors and the crowd start coming? I imagine it was probably not when you had 30 kids and I'm guessing that many at the games in the 5th division, or maybe it was. Who was the first sponsor and when was the first time you got a crowd north of 100?
This has been a slow burn, guys. Let's not be fooled by the immediate success. This is not an overnight success. This has taken, as I say, 77, we're heading into 78 years of toil. The club was founded by Macedonian immigrants in 1947. The story is well known that we were in the NSL in the halcyon days of football. And then, unfortunately, we didn't move with the times and were removed from the NSL and the higher league. So this has been a slow burn of just the engagement of layers of good people. Every year there's just more people coming on board, But in saying that, our longest serving sponsor, Genesis Steel, this is the Genesis family's 45th consecutive year as sponsors.
Wow.
So we've always had a good core, but we needed to give that core a reason to believe. From it, we've been able to grow, and our sponsorship and our club has been able to thrive on the back of, I think, some integrity and trust. You're asking people for their hard-earned money. So, we spoke about having a proposition or a reason to believe, but you also need some integrity and trust for people to open up their wallets, in many cases, their families' wallets, and give you whatever they're giving you, 3, 5, 10, 20, $50,000. That's money these families can go on holidays rather than give to a little, suburban club. So we've really had to work hard on the proposition, the trust, and the integrity and the compliance. And now people can see the investment of where their money is going. They can see their ROI. We probably, as a business, we call it Preston in Business. Between the Preston Business sponsors, we've calculated there's probably more than $15 to $20 million in transactional business being done. So this is everyone from, your builders, your trades, your plasterers, to your accountants, to your lawyers, you name it. We have it to your car providers, your caravan providers, your clothing manufacturers, your food providers. What we've been able to do is build a microeconomy where these sponsors actually now starting to use each other. Now, if they're investing in each other and their businesses are thriving, and they remember that connection and that network was provided by our football club, well, that's a great outcome for us.
So, David, I know you mentioned a lot earlier about how it was important for, the real community feel and having a lot of great volunteers when actually having to get the club back from the depths of, Victorian State League One. And, State League One over here in Western Australia is the second highest division. We don't exactly have that good of an NPL structure, but when you do find yourself in that sort of situation for a club, why is it that most clubs can't do what Preston do? Is it more just because of financial situations? Were there really just a lot of factors that went Preston's way? Or does it really have that much emphasis on having high quality people around the club, whether that just be volunteers or just consistent base of support? What really was the driving factor behind getting Preston back up there?
Yeah, great question. And it's not easy. There's no formula that I could apply to every club. This was a club, this is a giant that was sleeping. And what we needed to do for our club was to re-engage with our community and these people, because we'd been there before, clearly to achieve the status of playing in the NSL and, being so successful through the 80s and 90s. We knew we had a core or the foundations, but for any club out there, it's not easy. It's a really difficult proposition. I'm involved with a number of clubs. My children play football and basketball, and I apply a filter and a lens to these clubs. And all of the successful clubs, be it basketball clubs or any club, has a really good leadership group, and then a leadership group that's able to engage with the local community, because we all rely on participation rates. And from participation rates, so I guess, as we say, the kids are playing to pay their sport, and then by default, sponsors come and our local stakeholders become critical, be it, funding from local council, state government or federal government. That then, your strategy becomes elevated and you've got a stronger proposition when you can shift your gears through local council, state government and federal government funding. And in our case, that's been something that we're very proud of in terms of the infrastructure upgrades. We currently stand at 4 main grounds and 2 mini roos grounds, and on the verge of making a really exciting announcement with the federal government in the next 2 weeks, which I'll keep under wraps. But the amount of work that goes into this, the strategic partnerships, whilst we have an executive of 11 people, We also have 24, 25 advisors, and people say, "Oh, Dave, what are those advisors?" It's nothing special. It's just people within our community who love the club, be it engineers or architects or financiers or, financial specialists who can help us open doors and have good conversations with these key stakeholders who can drive the required benefits for the club.
It's interesting how you talk about the foundation being there, of course, the NSL fan base that you used to have. I'm curious of the people that are attending Preston games in NPL2 and now in NPL. Do you have an estimate roughly of what fraction were either the old fans from the NSL era or maybe the descendants of those fans? And how many are completely new people who've just been involved in the community?
Absolutely. I break it down into three elements. There's you know, at our core is the Macedonian community. The club was founded, as I said, by Macedonian immigrants. So at the foundation, you've got a very strong underpinning strength of the local community by default, generations. I will go to my father played for the club back in the late 60s. I played for the club and so have my daughter. So there's three generations attending. However, that would probably form 60 odd percent of the current population attending our club or our games. Remember now the diversity of our juniors with close to 500 juniors with two parents each. That's a very broad and diverse demographic we've tapped into. All of our junior parents have access to the game. They've got their membership cards that they're issued to attend all the games with their kids. Kids under 12 get in for free, which is fantastic. So that's the second layer. The third layer that we've really been surprised with is when I say local community, I'll break it down into two. Local community being those that live within, a radius of 10 to 15 kilometres of the club, who can drive down on a Friday night within, 10 to 20 minutes. But there's a second component to that, and that's the footballing community. There's a lot of football purists out there simply wanting to go and watch a great game of football that is still, I call it suburban. Our stadium at 6,000, 7,000 is heaving. If we move that crowd and played at Amy Park or a major stadium around Australia, it'll look hollow. It will look empty, and by default, you lose that feel. So what we've been able to do is re-engage. I think Friday night, there's 40% weren't your traditional supporters. 40% attending come from just the local community, football-loving people. We've got, every opposition team wants to come and watch on a Friday night. Come down, have a meal, have a drink. The football community is pretty tight. We're all pretty good friends. Yes, we might compete on a weekend, but we all know each other. And, whether players have played for you or coaches have coached or moved on, most games I know here in Melbourne on a Monday night, most of the football world would be at a Bulleen game. Bulleen traditionally plays their games on a Monday. And you'd probably see, 50 to 60 coaches and players down there from a range of teams. So it's just a tight-knit community, the football community.
So I guess moving away from the more community aspect and focusing on the logistics of actually building a side, your recruitment team, I'd have to say, has probably been one of the strongest in all of NPL football in Australia this season. You've signed plenty of ex-A-League talents, the likes of Matthew Bovanovsky, Stefan Negro, also guys like Leighton Brooks, who's a great young player, Jason Romero, Jonas Markovsky, the list goes on and on. You have a fantastic squad. So I guess, what is it like having to build a squad like that this season, and how difficult is it to have to compete with A-League clubs or even clubs overseas for players when you are looking to build a strong squad for not only the NPL, but the upcoming Australian Championship?
And that's an in-depth question, really good question, because our success over the last, I think it's been the last 5 years or 6 years, and you include COVID in that, we've won either championships or been promoted on 4 different occasions to get up to the league. So what we've had to do to continue to deliver this success is re-engineer our squad every year to the tune of 85 to 90%. So every year we've rebuilt 85 to 90% to ensure that it's kept us in that top tier of the league that we've gone in. And that's no different this year. Moving from last year to this year, we realised, and I'm blessed that I have Louis Artsevsky, who's heading into his 9th year as senior coach and a former player of the club, and as my football director, and as the club's football director, Mr. Sasha Ognanovsky, who is a former Socceroo Asian Player of the Year. So when we sit down and plan every year, we're planning to be competitive. And for 2025, competitive is not only the NPL, which we're currently playing in, but also the Australian Championship. And we break that down, and I know we'll talk about it a bit more. We're talking something in tune of when you put in the Australia Cup games in there, 45 to 48 games. So it's a long season. So we realised that we had to go out to market, be competitive, and try and lure some of these very, very successful or strong footballers. Yeah, it was actually this year wasn't very difficult with the proposition we had, but whether it was, Stefan Negro wanting to come, Matt Bozanowski was one of the first players, despite having invitations and offers from A-League clubs and abroad, to bring Jonas Markowski back from Japan, Leighton Brooks, as we say. But within there, you start to think of, Emil Pios, Jan Albano. So we brought Emil over from South Melbourne. We brought Jan over. And when you think of the proposition of a footballer, everyone's going to get paid, whether they're at our club or any other club. We're not paying any more than any other club. So that wasn't the strength in our proposition. There was two key components to the strength in our proposition to lure these players. I'll make it three. One is honesty, and we'll stick to our word in terms of their contracts. They're all on long-term contracts now, so it gives them some security, and they're at a good club. Two was the lure of playing both NPL and the Australian Championship, which, as we've spoken, will take them up there close to 40 games. So financial benefit to them. However, the most compelling, and we're aware of it, this is our competitive advantage, is when you say to a player, do you want to play in front of 200 people or do you want to play in front of thousands of people? What's the value that a player puts on that? That's a question that only the player will know. And I know from the players that we signed, they are so proud on Friday. Anyone who saw the footage, the players didn't come in for about half an hour post games. Firstly, they're probably thanking their family and their friends, but they're going around to every little kid. We give them balls, we give them badges, and we're showing our gratitude to the broader community. So, yeah, there's no single recipe to this, but it's a combination of some strategy around the players. And we pride ourselves on, and I'll say it, unfortunately, I'm going to use this language. We pride ourselves on having a no dickhead prop policy. So the men and women's team, they were actually together tonight on ground 2, and we take pride out of being a strong club and by default a strong family with good people in it.
If that's your policy, I'll refrain from asking if there's any specific names which couldn't be signed for the club because they violate that policy. So
that's a question for Louis. If you ever interview Louis, you'll probably have a few, but anyway, it's a total topic.
So I know Sasha Ognanovsky campaigned pretty passionately against the player point system. He said it was making it difficult to build a competitive squad as well as play enough youth. Alex, of course, mentioned all the great names you have for which are some of your older players, but you also have a pretty high fraction of minutes given to youth as well. I believe that Sasha's campaign was successful. Has that been a big part in why are you able to produce a stronger squad?
So there's two components to your question. First of all, the player point system is still in place for this year. So we've gone, if Sasha had his way, he would be promoting as many young players as we could. As our football director, that's a key role of Sasha's. He oversees football right down to our under fours program. So and the man has played around the world. His achievements are up there in Australian football. His work in Asia was incredible. So when we peel it right back, what we're working towards is a system where we potentially have up to 5 under 23s. So some of the engineering that's being put in place is having 5 under 23s in your match day squad. And as a part of the under 23s, that's also ensuring that we've got under 20s. And that's what Sasha's been campaigning for these young players to be given the opportunity to come up. Yes, from the squad or the team, we need to be investing in everything from a 18 or a 17-year-old to a 22-year-old, from a 23 to 27-year-old, with a smattering of 28 to 31, 32-year-olds with experience. However, I think our model, and I know our strategy, would be to ensure that the players that we're bringing clearly have the footballing capability, are good humans, but fit within that profile of the three segments where we've got a good spread of, we've got some really good players that we picked up from the academies: Lucas Trenkowski, goalkeeper; Noah Sposowski, Dom Polino, Giorgio Sedenis. These are players that have come along in leaps and bounds. Emil Pios, young player. We then have, as you guys rightfully said, ex-A League players: Leighton Brooks, Stefan Negro, Matt Bozanovsky, and the list goes on. So it's a good balance that we've got to have. But I think where we would like to see the game go is to encourage, and we're hearing 5 players in the senior squad for the championship potentially at the end of the year. How good is that for football for, a 17, 18-year-old? And we're seeing it in the A-League. As a result of the cost cutting, the A-League's finally playing younger kids that are getting a chance. And I think the game's better off for it. And I think we've seen the success of the Australian team in recent weeks at a youth level. That will have a flow on. And we need to play our role, and we are a part of this pyramid. We've got to connect the pyramid. We've got to give kids opportunity. If they play well at our level, maybe they will go play overseas or play in the A-League. Maybe they will then put themselves in the shop window for the Socceroos, because traditionally we've provided some unbelievable Socceroos that came from a little club called Preston. The likes of Sasha Granovsky, George Zaleski, George Slifkas, Andrew Zinni, the list goes on, Warren Spink. These players all played for Preston in the halcyon days of the 80s and 90s. Why? Because they were all given a chance. If you ask any of those Socceroo legends when they debuted, most of them would say they probably debuted between the age of 16 and 18 and weren't in a locked system. And I think this year I've seen, whether it be the A-League or the NPL, a lot of young talent is being given an opportunity.
So I guess one major problem that a lot of Australian football fans can relate with, and I guess complain about in some way, is that the Australian football calendar is around half the size of a lot of major European leagues. You look at the Championship in England, or even League One, League Two, you have 46 league games, and on top of that, about 3 or 4 cup competitions. And in Australia, you only really do have your domestic league and then maybe a cup competition run on the side if you want to do the Australian Cup and take that seriously. But with the addition of the Australian Championship, the season is now much bigger for those foundation clubs and also the clubs that are going to be in the inaugural season. So in terms of player contracts, now obviously most player contracts would normally last maybe upmost of 30 weeks. Now they're going to be well over 40 weeks. Do you think that has any effect on player development? And do you think it's a positive impact for young players, I guess, in Australian football going forward to have those extended deals?
I think 2025 will be a landmark year in the sense that football will see and reap the benefits for the next 5 to 10 years. This is a blessing. This is a blessing in disguise. And I can only speak on behalf of my club. The squad we have built this year, 23, 24 players of all ages, including 17 to 21-year-olds, with the 26 games of NPL plus potential 3 finals, and with the 6 games of the Australian Championship starting in October, with once again the 3 finals. And let's overlay Australia and the Australia Cup. There's an opportunity for potentially 45 games to be played. Now, no single player can play 45 games. So what that has enabled us to do is it will give opportunity to up-and-coming young players to put themselves in the shop window and to play football for 28 games, 36 games. Players need to be playing. Most of them, if you ask them, give them 6 weeks off. If we give them 6 weeks off for a year, that takes us from 52 weeks down to 46 weeks, if my maths is right. And a little pre-season, the shorter the off-season, the fitter they are, and we go again. So as we see overseas, we've got to ensure we're working to connect our footballing ecosystem. We have a disconnected football ecosystem. It is going to take some time, but the pyramid is being built, and I think we're going to reap the benefits of the transition year that is 2025. Because, hey, yes, we're playing in a championship towards the end of the year, but the aspiration of the foundation clubs is to have a fully blown home and away season that then potentially with time does get connected by a pro rel to a higher league, be it A League or whatever.
You mentioned the phrase blessing in disguise to refer to the Champions League model of the second division. I have to say, in June last year, around about when it started to get rumored that we're not going to have a home and away, it felt like a real gut punch, to be honest. But I've started to come around a little bit. It does seem like this has produced a bit of momentum and hype for ambition in clubs in the NPL. Can you tell me a little bit how Preston reacted to that whole process and how this is actually a blessing in disguise and what effect has it had on the club, this Champions League format, which is coming out this year?
I've been very honoured and blessed that I've been involved in the FA working groups. I've heard names of B League NST, but let's just call it the championship. I've been involved in these discussions now for 6 years and privy to information. Now, the FA went about building out its application process for a fully blown home and away season. That's on record. Process started in 2023. Clubs were announced, and we had aspirations of beginning this home and away league as early as this year, 2025. What we've got to make sure we do as a football community, and Football Australia's got to make sure, is that we have, let's call it 12 strong teams. I don't want to be playing in a league where Preston's strong, but the 12th bottom team or the 10th bottom team are weak and on the verge of, bankruptcy or folding. We do not want that. Does not give me any pleasure. So what we've got to be doing at the moment and what the FA is doing, and it has announced, so I'm not speaking out of school. We're going ahead with the championship at the end of the year. It will give us a lot of data. It will give us an insight into the product and how we can continue to grow it. At the same time, the FA has announced that it will be going back to market. I think they're calling it the RFP process for further applications. There are genuinely 4 to 6 genuine clubs who are in discussions with the FA around their application to join the 8 foundation clubs and to join them on merit. If they join them on merit and can meet the criteria that, the likes of Preston, Avondale, Marconi, Apia, Sydney Olympic, Wollongong, Avondale, and South Melbourne met, then we're going to have a strong league. We can't have a weak league. And this is what's underpinned the strategic decisions that have been made, not only by FA, but by FA in consultation with the foundation clubs and aspirational clubs. So when I said it's a blessing in disguise, yes, we needed to play something this year. And the championship with the foundation clubs and the winners of the various NPL systems around the country will be an entree. Let's call it an entree to what hopefully will be, the main meal, which is a fully blown, fully produced. When I say produced, why shouldn't we have a broadcaster? Why shouldn't we have major sponsors? Why shouldn't we have a strategic financial plan that the clubs are aware of and benefit from and contribute to? So all of these pieces of information are being transparently spoken about. There's nothing that I, as the president of Preston Lions Football Club, don't know. The FA, our meetings, the clubs between ourselves continue to meet, and I'm positive that we're going to drive some great outcomes and that there's a lot. We've all seen the response to the Australian Championship being launched in the last month. There's a lot of energy in it and there's a lot of excitement. And I know the likes of, James Johnson, Nate Godfrey, Peter Philopoulos and the teams at FA are working hard behind the scenes to make sure that we've got the right strategy in place.
That's reassuring to hear that there is a lot of passion to make this home and away season happen. What would you say to a lot of the fans, which I've seen, are a bit skeptical and saying maybe the FA still don't want these historic clubs? Maybe there's almost sabotage or at least apathy going on. What would you say to reassure them that there is actually passion towards a home and away, as you say?
Yeah. First and foremost, I'm a supporter. I've got a father who's another supporter and my daughter. So we talk football like normal families and like, normal supporters. And I side with the supporters who are wanting something better. Football in this country of the round ball nature, we've been in pain. We've struggled at times. There is a renaissance, the Socceroos, the Matildas, the success in the last 20 years has created a renaissance. So I firmly believe that we need to stick together and work together. When you look at the amount of kids playing it, there's your reason. That's our reason to believe. We've probably got one of the strongest sports at grassroots level. So how do we build on that, and how do we build out this league? To your question about the FA wants are connected. And James has come out and he said, I want a strong connected system like the rest of the world has. But he can't just click his fingers. No one can click their fingers. This has got to be the total sum of all the parts, and all of the parts are us, football lovers, our club, me as a president, our supporters coming together to do the right thing by the game. Because, hey, traditionally, have we got it right? Who knows? Have we got it wrong? Who knows? But this is our opportunity to look towards the future. As I say to all of my supporters, members, sponsors, it's in our hands now to take really good care of the game and of the product. This is new football now. When we have 35% of our attendees being female, and loving the game, and the participation is at parity at girls and women's level, this is new football, and we need to embrace the change. And I'll say this bluntly, anyone not wanting to embrace the change and come in with a mentality that's not fitting, they just don't belong in the game anymore. Stay home. Stay home. Don't come. You're not welcome. So it's kind of, there's been a fundamental shift. And we saw that on Friday night with our crowd of chanting teenagers, girls, families. And we need all clubs to be successful because they've all got their communities and they've all got their families that it will support.
So, what would you say to someone who's skeptical about the premise that we need a strong league, that's maybe waiting, and we could be waiting unnecessarily, that if we had a league with wherever we're at, that we can just let it grow, that if we started it, whatever clubs are available, whatever can be there by sporting merit, we can let it grow? That's been one of the narratives and one of the frustrations of one side of the fan base. I was curious, how would you address that and say, no, actually, these are the benefits of starting with a strong league?
The answer to that is very simple. There's a void. The A-League is producing players, as we've said before, for the youth teams. But imagine, hypothetically, let's do the numbers. 12 new teams. 12 new teams, let's say average squad was 24. Do the maths, help me. I'm not the best at maths, but 12 times 24 has to be up around the high 200s in terms of numbers. That's 288 players, plus your coaches, plus your referees, right? Let's not forget the referees here who can be refereeing in and learning the game in here, and the linos, right? That's over 300 professional people, semi-professional people participating at, let's call it, the second highest level of Australian football, applying their trade, learning their craft. And I've got no doubts that I won't even give it a year. It'll be 3 to 6 months in where, whether it be A-Leagues or overseas clubs, will be signing players from this system, or coaches, or referees. And within 12 months or 2 years, I've got no doubts that we'll probably produce a Socceroo that has simply not been spotted. And no better case, anyone wanting to go and have a look at what happened to Sasha Gnanovsky and where he came from and his journey, he was not discovered till very late in his life. I think he would have been 27, 28. And I believe Frank Farina might have given him a chance up at Brisbane. Sasha Gnanovsky was lost to the Australian system. And what this will do will create a new shop window. No doubts about it.
So let's go to the other side of the fan base who would be more skeptical of the NST. What would you say to those who say there's simply not enough money in the game, or alternatively, that the only way that this could get up at all is if NPL clubs raise fees on junior fees? What would you say to reassure that side of the fan base?
Yeah, that's a really good comment. I think NPL clubs are probably on the edge. Some of them, I'm hearing fees of 3,500, 4,000 per kid at an NPL rate. And if you do the modelling, and I've been privy to do the modelling for our club, and I've actually been privy to do the modelling for some aspirational clubs who I'm helping complete their championship applications for the second division, second tier. I think it's actually achievable, because what we haven't overlaid, and I know that FA would love to overlay this, but is the commercial aspect to the game. Think broadcasters, think sponsors, think revenue, think professionalism. I think football is more than capable, if we had the right teams with the right product, As I say, we've been able to engage with 150 odd sponsors. And most clubs can, no different to ours, find their local community, engage with sponsors. And if they can't, they won't put their hand up. But these clubs that are putting their hand up need to go through a very rigorous process that they have to meet the criteria of the FA. It's been run professionally, and by default, then those clubs that will be selected for this new league in association with Federation Football Australia, I firmly believe that the model's there. The economic model is there. Will we be stretched? Yes, every club will be stretched. We're stretched every year, but we need an aspiration. We need to be able to deliver. And this product, there's been a shift even in the last 6 months of clubs coming out now based on seeing the 8 foundation clubs and the strength of the NPL and now of the Australian Championship. Their hands up. There's some great clubs, not in Victoria, not in New South Wales, around Australia who have started to believe and are having some very serious conversations. There's some unbelievable clubs in Australia.
Now, we discussed earlier about one of the things that I guess a lot of Australian football fans have been wanting to see is an extended football calendar. But another thing that I think a lot of us agree is absolutely vital to the future of the game in Australia and I guess the growth of Australian football overall, especially the A-League and the Australian Championship down the line, is the introduction of a new domestic transfer system. Now, we've seen clubs in Australia are starting to get increased fees for a lot of their young talents, though it is below the ball when you compare the talents of some of our players compared to what our counterparts in maybe Austria or Belgium or other countries such as that are able to get for talents of a similar skill level. Now, my question to you, David, is how crucial would a new domestic transfer system be to the survival and I guess thriving of certain NPL and Australian Championship clubs going forward? And are we seeing any serious effects of one not being in place at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's very important from a strategic perspective. It's a key pillar in terms of getting the transfer system, as you say, aligned at all levels, because as the game continues to grow, the opportunities for players to be signed locally, but also overseas increases. And that creates a financial ecosystem that will benefit the clubs. Now, I think it's fundamentally critical that we get it right. I know the FA's put in a lot of work, and it's something that, for example, at the moment, if one of our players signed for an A-League club or overseas, we it's very limiting in terms of the amount of compensation that we get. So, yes, to your question, this is a critical pillar that aligns to there being a connected pyramid, to there being a new second tier, and to there being an effective transfer system within the game.
Yeah, I noticed when I was looking at the lower leagues in Europe on transfer market, that quite a lot of those clubs, they're sustained by domestic transfers pretty much matching their player budget. The A-League's basically heading into that direction itself. And of course, there is other avenues of as you guys have found, where you can, of course, give a special parking spot to the manager of McDonald's. So hopefully we'll be okay. Do you have any information about, is there progress on bringing about a domestic transfer system to help make the championship easier to be sustainable?
Yeah, it's something that I know the FA's been working on. They've been communicating it with us. It's a key strategic pillar for them, because when you start to look, I think the academies have got it really. I get to see, and we've played against the likes of the Victory, Western, and City academies. If you start having a look at let's call it the Melbourne City model, where the players are now really coming through by the age of 18, 19, debuting, applying their trade for potentially 2 to 3 years, to the age of 20, 22, 23, being put in the shopping window for an international transfer or a domestic transfer. That clearly then makes it a sustainable mechanism and a sustainable ecosystem for the football world. And we want to be a part of that, where, we are rewarded for, let's say a kid coming to our club at 7 or 8 years of age and, staying with us for 12 and 13 years. Each and every club needs to be rewarded accordingly. If we can get that right, I think that's when we'll see our game really thrive and our clubs thriving.
We've talked about trying to get some of the clubs over the line to try and get this home and away season happening. In your case, of course, you guys are already thriving with massive crowds, evidently 9,000 people on Friday night. I'm curious, how far are you from taking whatever the next step is for your club, whether that's building bigger stands or going full time, fully pro contracts, or perhaps having an upgrade to your academy or free junior fees? What is that next step, and how far are you from making it with the size of your crowds and sponsorships?
Thank you. Well, we've got a very clear strategy that I think I rattle out our strategy consistently. Nothing's changed in our strategy. And, one of the key elements you talk about is infrastructure. We'll continue to invest in infrastructure. We're coming from a long way back, and whether it be asphalting the entire ground, building a new grandstand, or building a brand new synthetic ground, they're all a part of our strategic plan. And we've made all those announcements that, we'll see with a plan, we'll see them come to fruition in the next 3 to 5 years. We're very comfortable that we'll have a brand new grandstand to give us additional capacity and comfort. We know that we'll have a synthetic ground in the pipeline because our winters in Melbourne are pretty rough and the grounds do chew up. So I think from our end, it's simply sticking true to our strategy. We've planned for all of these things and we've forecasted, and I think that's underpinned our success over the last 10 years. The fact that we've had a strategy every 5 years, we tick it off the elements of the strategy, we rebuild a new strategy. The people behind this, some of Australia's leading corporate leaders are on our board, and thinkers, thought leaders who we sit down and we go, okay, what do we want to achieve? And we go about doing it. We need a plan. Everyone needs a plan. Without one, you'll get lost.
Thank you. So that's hopefully very inspiring to other clubs, and hopefully we're on the verge of hearing about four new foundation clubs, which can get a home and away national second tier next year. So Preston Lions faced a difficult period, dropping from the Victorian Premier League in 2009 and dropping all the way down to the fourth tier by 2011. During that time, tough times, fans saying one day we'll be back. True to their word, the club made an incredible comeback, earning promotions in 2019, 2022, 2024 to return to the top division by 25. What led to the decline, and how did the club manage to turn things around?
I think it was just simple at the time. There's some people putting in, what they thought was the right strategy and effort, and football was changing, and we needed to change with the time. But when you look at the turnaround, and I can sometimes sit and giggle when I think, the ATO was owed money, and the last person you want to owe any money to is the ATO. But what had happened then was, okay, who's going to go and speak to the ATO? Everyone was scared, So we had a very courageous gentleman who kept it simple and put his hand up and said, I'm going to go in and have a good chat to the ATO about the money we owe them and how we're going to repay them back. Because that was a massive weight on the shoulders of the club in the rebuild, having this debt to the ATO. Now, you have the debt as, a club, but most people don't want to go in by themselves and say, hey, I'm here, we owe you money. So credit to that man, who we all know who he is at our club, but that went in and faced off with the ATO and said, hey, I'm here to offer a repayment plan. And within 48 months, we'd paid off our debt, you know, cleaned the slate, and we're able to then focus on the job at hand, which was to rebuild our juniors, rebuild our women's and men's programs. But yeah, that goes down in the history of our club as a momentous occasion where someone had the audacity and the integrity to go into the ATO and come up with a plan to clear the runway for us.
David, did you ever meet the man that came up with the song? I need to hear about it. Do you have any stories regarding it? Obviously, it's iconic around the club. Do you have anything to tell us?
Well, we have a couple of songs, but the song "One Day We Will Be Back," I think, the last 10 to 15 years has become football folklore and Preston folklore, because I actually had to research the singer who, God bless him, has passed away, but he was asked to write a song about the club, and he lived overseas, and the words just echo. The words echo. One day we'll be back. And I think it kind of drove us. The song drove us that we could get back, that this singer, 15, 20 years ago came up with this song that one day we'll be back. And last year, it was late August, Langwarrin, cold winter day. We went down 1-0 in the 7th minute mark, but then in the 93rd minute mark, Connor Bell, who has seen 4 successive promotions, bangs the ball into the back of the net. And Josh Parrish, I think that I can still hear the words, not only one day we'll be back, but, we're back to the promised land. We're going back to the promised land was a beautiful, I think, tie into the song One Day We'll Be Back. And yeah, it's now time for us to create a new song, I think. I don't know what the tune will look like, but I think it's time for us to create the future and respect the past, but create the future.
Preston are back, hopefully, the next song.
So we are back.
Lastly, thank you so much for joining us. One last question. Where do you see Preston Lions FC a decade from now?
Very good question. I don't know where I'm going to be in a decade from now. Being the president of the club, I don't know whether I've got 10 more years in me, but that's a part of the succession plan that we have. But what I dream, this is my dream, and quite often I speak to my family at home. My daughters have a fascination with this football club and what we do. And when I say we do as a family. But in 10 years, I'd like Preston to be a healthy club that is producing young people, that we've produced players for the Matildas and the Socceroos that are becoming the new idols and the heroes, not only for the community of Preston, but for Australian football, like the Sasha Gnanovskis, and that our club and that all clubs are collaborating and fostering a successful footballing ecosystem. This is our time as clubs to unite, work together, and I'm seeing this at our NPL level, and help each other become better clubs for our communities, but more importantly for the young children who are going to be the future of the game, the future of my club, because, I will be so proud in 10 years. If I'm involved, I'll always be involved in the club. I've got no choice. My mother dropped me on my head there in 1972. My father was a former player, but I'd be very, very proud if I went to a game in 10 years' time. Potentially my eldest daughter might be the first, or hopefully not the first, female president leading it into the top league in Australia. Why shouldn't we be in the top league in Australia? That will be 2035. And if we've got a fully connected pyramid, we should have an aspiration to continue to grow as a club, to be playing not only at the highest level in Australia, then by default qualify for whatever Asian championships there are available. Why not? There's no ceiling on this.
Fellas, it's been an amazing chat. A huge thanks to Preston Lions president David Cvetkovski for joining us. Don't forget to head over to greenandgoldfc.com and let us know your thoughts on the episode. You can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Just search for Green and Gold FC. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to follow, rate, and share it. It really helps us out. That's all for today. Thanks for listening. Until next time, it's bye for now.
Let's go, Preston, Macedonia, Macedonia, hey, Macedonia. Raboti me, od utropa do mrak, a jedna želba imame, one day we'll be back, one day we'll be back, one day we'll be back. One day we'll be back. I zakla ponedela, ne me zadevaj, aj spomene na sokata, od srce navivaj, od srce